What happens to us after we die? Do we cease to exist, or do we live on? This may be the biggest question that mankind has ever asked, as well as what this podcast is about. In this show, we will examine past life memories, speak with professional hypnotherapists, astral projection practitioners, psychics, and much more, all in an attempt to decipher this riddle. So welcome to the puzzle. Welcome to the regression session. Welcome back to the regression session. My name is Ian, and welcome to my new baby that we just had last week. I've really been enjoying having her, and she's actually the reason that this episode is a little bit late. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you all for the well wishes, those of you that reached out to me. In this episode, we're going to hear from Marylin Elliot. And Marylin is actually the host of the podcast Reincarnation Past Lives Revisited. What she does in her podcast is she lays out documented cases of reincarnation and goes through them step by step and lays out all the evidence and the stories and just kind of picks them apart and just lays them out. So definitely head on over to her show after this episode and check her out if you're interested in finding like evidence-based reincarnation stories. Head on over to my Facebook or my Twitter so that you can get show updates. And now that my baby is born and things are starting to calm down and we're starting to get into a little bit more of a routine, I'm going to start trying to post some more content there, some bonus content, maybe some collaborations with other podcasts and things like that. So head on over there. It's the Regression Session podcast on Facebook and at Regression Session on Twitter. Links in the description. There's also going to be links to Marylin's podcast in the description as well. Definitely check her out, like I said. Now that all that's taken care of, here's my conversation with Marylin. Hey Marylin, thanks for coming on to the show.
Hi, Ian. Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is my first time being on the other side of the microphone.
It is a really different feeling, to be
It
honest
is.
with you. It's almost like intimidating, but relaxing at the same time.
It's quite interesting. It'll give me a whole new perspective for my interviewees, so it might make me a little kinder on them.
Oh, wonderful. Well, before we get going into whatever we're going to talk about, because I don't actually know, if you don't mind just introducing yourself to my audience, whatever you're comfortable with talking about, like your background beliefs, like what kind of led you up to the point of starting the podcast and talking about all this awesome stuff that you're doing.
Well, I actually grew up in a small country town called, well, it's not really small, but it's called Ballarat, which is about 100k, or I think it's about 70 miles, I think it is, from Melbourne. And in Ballarat, you didn't really come across reincarnation at all. I grew up in a Methodist family, and it was not even on the table. It was never even talked about. And there used to be this great magazine that I used to love called the Australasian Post, which was this really weird, eclectic magazine that sort of spoke about things like, it could have a range from opera to cricket to UFOs to serial killers, and it covered just anything. And one day I was reading it, and the case of the Pollock twins was covered in the episode. Now, for people who haven't heard of it, the Pollock twins were two little girls who were killed in England. It was actually them and another little boy who was a friend. That they were walking along the road, and a car mounted the pavement and struck them all and killed them instantly on the spot. And their father was really into reincarnation, and he was convinced that his daughters were going to come back to him. They ended up having twins who actually then, the father then went on to claim that they had the memories of the prior girls. So that was how I first became introduced to reincarnation. And I'd never been really a religious person. My parents were very strict, and I'd gone to, and it was just too, for me, I don't really ring well with standardized religion. I'm too much of a person who needs more proof, I suppose you could say. So for me, the Bible didn't really do it. And so I kind of wasn't really anything. I used to call myself basically atheist. But the minute I heard about reincarnation, I went, yeah, this rings true to me. And I think this is what I really believe in. So that was when my first interest in reincarnation started. With regards to the podcast, I've always believed in reincarnation. I've always been fascinated by it. And I was running some B&Bs in the hills during COVID. But when COVID happened, unfortunately, we had to get out of them because, of course, people couldn't stay in cottages anymore or in any kind of B&B. And I just was at a kind of loose end. We were in lockdown. I wanted to try and do something entrepreneurial. I've always wanted to do entrepreneurial stuff. I've always been someone who's been interested in that. And I went looking, because we were, home, nothing to do. I went looking for some podcasts on reincarnation. And I found one, and I think you know of him, Simon Bowen, but there wasn't really much else out there that people were doing with regards to reincarnation at that time. And I went, well, if I'm looking for an episode on it, so must other people. Because I wanted to get a reincarnation podcast where it covered the cases, not just the kind of the spiritual aspect of it. So I started just recording episodes where I covered the cases. And then as I've gone along, I've kind of also picked up some interviews, and I've ended up becoming associated with Jim Matlock, who is one of the major researchers really in reincarnation research at the moment. And he has a forum called Signs of Reincarnation on Facebook, if anyone's keen to have a listen. And we cover the reincarnation cases that are sort of covered under the research of Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're actually the main sort of, I suppose you could say, the main forces in reincarnation research today. So
yes, sorry. By the way, I had my mic muted, and I was like, yes, I do know them.
Well, their work is the sort of stuff that we actually kind of really focus on. And that's because children's memories are actually the purest form, in a sense, of reincarnation recall. They often happen when kids are like 2 years old. I mean, they can happen before that. Children can actually be demonstrating that they're disturbed by having night terrors and things. And then as they start to speak, they'll start to say things like, I remember I was living here and I died this way, And to me, that blows me away, because I can remember when I was a child not finding out about death until I was about 6 or 7. And then, of course, I realized, oh, my God, I'm going to die one day. And I was terrified. But these kids are often talking about it from 2 or 3, and they're talking about it in a matter-of-fact way. Oh, I was living here and, we did this, and, a cart rolled over the top of me and I died and came to you, or I died and went to somewhere else, because they'll often talk about what we call the intermission period, which is the in-between time between lives. So, and when I started looking at these cases, I looked at them and went, this just completely verifies and proves to me what I believe personally about reincarnation. And the more I look into it, the more it proves it to me.
Well, I love the way that you go about it too, because in your show, you actually go through the case step by step, tell the story, and you try to look at it really objectively. And, there's kind of two sides to this whole entire thing, right? And then there's a couple people that are in the middle, like me. But you've got the people that are like really far out there, like people that are like, I believe in the fairy realm and the angel realm and the dragon realm, and that the earth is transitioning to 5D and all this stuff. And then you have the people like you that are like, and like Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker and I forget his name. You just brought him up his Facebook page.
Jim Matlock.
Yep, Jim Matlock. Him. Those people are like, we have to catalog this in a scientific way. So there's two sides to this, and then there's just like a handful of people that are like, yeah, and we're in the middle, and I'm just kind of sharing, putting it out there, whatever people want to talk about. So I think that your side is actually really necessary for this conversation as well, because there's a lot of people that need that proof.
Yeah, well, that's actually the reason why, as I said, I kind of fell into the podcast, just wanted to do one because it was something that I was interested in. But as I went along, I've actually changed. Oh, the dog's carrying on. Can you hear in the background? Is she causing a problem?
Nope, it's fine.
Nope. Okay. As I went along, I kind of realized that what I was doing was actually important, because for a couple of really a few different reasons when I look at it. The first one was, as I went through the cases and was talking about the kids, I started realizing that there's a lot of trauma to these memories, and often children who have past life memories seem to remember very violent deaths, and they can often really affect how they feel in this life. It can leave them with phobias. It can leave them with very traumatic memory. And when they talk to their parents about it, often the parents are kind of blown away by this, and they go, I don't know what's going on here. And so they will often shut the child down. So I realized it's really important we start this dialogue for that. We need to, for a start, open up our thought processes about it, and to kind of accept that if these children say these things, they're not saying it as imagination. They're not saying it as being, trying to joke. It's serious to them. And you can hear that from the tone of their voice. Their tone of their voice is very matter of fact. They're not talking about it like, how kids do when they talk about, oh, I want to be a princess and I've got to have a castle, and they've got a sort of a sing song. These kids will be just saying things like, I remember when I was with my other mummy and we didn't have enough food to eat and I floated away. Or they'll say something like that, and it's really very matter of fact, like they're just talking about any memory. So I thought that was important for a start for that. But the other thing that I started to realize too as I was going along is that I want to conserve the cases that are out there, because there were a lot of cases that came out in the 70s and 80s, and they're starting to disappear because there's all these other new cases coming over the top. And the conservator in me feels it's a shame if we lose them, because they're part of my history, part of our history, part of reincarnation's history. So it's really important to conserve them so that they're there for people who want to explore reincarnation and who want to have a look at what it was like back then, the problems it had back then, because the history of reincarnation in the Western world is very different to the history of reincarnation in, say, someone like India or Cambodia, or they're more accepting of it, because for them it's just part of that's what they understand life to be. It's part of their culture almost. For us, it's very different. And that's another reason why it's important to talk about it, because in the Western world, because we are so, I don't mean to be awful, but we're materialistic and we tend to focus on things that we can see and things that we often negate it and we kind of push it away. And I think it's important for it to be spoken about so that it can open a dialogue on it. And the third most important part is we need that research to keep going on. Ian Stevenson's already died. Erlinda Harrelson, who was another major researcher, died recently. We're kind of in a group where the researchers are getting older. And so we need to start getting the message out there to try and encourage people who are younger to get into reincarnation, or even any kind of sort of scientific research about paranormal things, because I still struggle with some aspects of the paranormal experiences out there. But when it comes to reincarnation and the kids, I'm convinced it's genuine. I'm convinced it's real. And as you say, I'm convinced that the cases that come up from regression too, there are definitely people out there who are getting up regression memories. And I think most people do, but it's just something you've got to be a bit careful with. That's all.
Yeah, and a couple things just to kind of touch on that you've brought up over that was when you have these kids talking about their death. I mean, I don't know about you, and I don't know about anybody else out there, but I do not talk about death to my child as a
No.
2-year-old child. Okay. I have not once brought up death or the concept of dying to my son. And something interesting that happened the other day was I was watching this show where this guy was about to die from a mortal wound, and he saw his mother appear to him. And my son, he's almost 3, and he looks at the TV and then he goes, "His mom's not dead, Daddy." And I looked at him with I was shocked, Marylin. I said, "What did you just say?" And he said, "His mom's not dead. See?" And I was like, "What?" I was like, "How do you know what dead means?" And he just goes, "I don't know." And then he walks away and just goes and like plays with his toys. So I have no idea how to explain that because his mom showed up earlier in a flashback, and I was like, "Oh, he's just hugging his mommy." That's all I said. That's all I said. And then he's like, "His mom's not dead." So where does that concept of death comes from? Because I know that most parents don't talk about death with their children.
Exactly. And the thing is, you find as you go along, especially when you're in the forum, you get people, there are dozens of people popping up saying, my child told me that when they were my mother, they didn't spank me, or that, they had to change my diaper, or, kids will pop out these little sentences destined to drive you insane, I'm sure. And then they'll kind of just wander off, and that might be the only thing you ever hear of it. But to me, it points to that the memories are in all of us, that we actually, even though most of the population don't have reincarnation memories, they're there. They're in our brain, and they do influence us in this life as much as they did in that life, because I think one of the things that we've spoken about is regression is brilliant for helping people with healing with phobias. And that's because when you live a life like that and you have something, I mean, you think about your own life. If you think about the baggage that we pick up in this life from the experiences that we've had, the same thing happened in the life before this, and the life before that, and the life before that. So you're going to have people who are going to pick up phobias. They're going to pick up even just dislikes of certain people or certain races or whatever, because of what they've experienced in the past lives. So, I really honestly think that that's what's happening.
Yeah, and when the kids talk about it, unfortunately, and this is another thing you kind of brought up, you didn't really touch on it. I'm not afraid to go in on it hard, but a lot of parents will shut their kids down, and it's because, in my opinion, of the religion part of it. In the Western civilization, we a lot of us have been raised Catholic or Methodist or Baptist, or in my case Mormon, and Christian religions look, and similar religions out there, they look at this life as a one and done. So you get one chance. That's just a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things to prove that you're there for God, and if you're not there for God, then you get to go to hell. And it's just like, okay, yeah, but God loves you, right? I don't think so, in my opinion. But that's kind of why, and I you can tell I have some feelings. But anyway, that's, I think, why people kind of shut that down, is because they're like, oh, we're not supposed to talk about that.
We're not supposed to talk about that, and we're not supposed to believe that, because the Bible doesn't say that. And that's where the problem that you've got that comes in for me with regards to religion. I think religion is a good thing for people, if it gives them a strong moral code to follow, and if they gain a sense of faith or acceptance or happiness in their life. I think religion can be a beautiful thing. But the trouble that we have with religion is that it also builds a lot of fear, because people become afraid of bucking the church. They become afraid of anything that might change their mindset on what actually happens. And my view of it is, if you have a religion or a belief, my belief is reincarnation, I'm willing to question that and challenge that at any point, because what is the point in believing something that is not true? So
right. And I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's fine.
I'm in the same boat. I'm in the same boat. I mean, as far as like questioning your beliefs go, in that religious space, you can't do that because, like you said, it's fear. Ultimately, what I want people to, the reason I want people to move away from religion is because I want people to basically realize that you don't have to subjugate yourself to this God, because this God that you're trying to find is within you. So really what you have to have faith in is yourself. That's what I think is it for me. But yeah.
I think that's very true. I mean, we kind of spoke a little bit before we started about guardian angels and spirits and things like that. I think when you're talking about God and you're talking about religion and you're talking about reincarnation, to be honest, I think we're actually all talking about the same thing. It's just the terminology. But I don't believe that on the other side there is any kind of retribution. I don't believe in karma because I don't believe that there is any system there that says, right, you stuffed up in this life, so I'm going to punish you in the next one. I don't think it works that way at all. I think what happens is, I mean, if you think about your own life here, that there are things we all build as we go along. There's always something that you're going to be remorseful about or regretful about or you wish you did differently. And those things can pluck at you in a quiet moment. You can sit there and feel it'll pop back into your head and you'll go, wish I hadn't done that, you know. I think that's what happens when we get on the other side. I think our own sense of, we know when we stuffed up, we know when we did it right, we know when we didn't. And I think that is the only retribution, and that's what we learn from. So why would you have to have yet another system built in whereby someone else comes along, canes you on the wrist and says, oh, you did that wrong, so I'm going to send you this back this time to be a murder victim, or I'm going to send you back this time to have an abusive relationship. You know, I don't believe that's how it works at all. I think that from what I've seen from the research, surprisingly, the children often do talk about that they pick their parents. So one of the things that comes up in the forum a lot is people go, well, why would I have picked my parents? Because they're a nightmare, you know? Well, my own upbringing was pretty rough as well. I actually started out and I was adopted. And, you know, I asked myself a lot when I found this sort of, and it comes up in the research so much, it must be true. Most kids describe, I saw my parents walking on the beach and I liked them, so I came to them. You know, and then there's other things called announcing dreams, which can happen, which is where a child will see someone and come to them in a dream and say, I'm going to come to you as your child. And often the parent will be like, I don't want you to. And it's like, tough, I'm coming, you know, and it will happen. And there's cases like that quite frequently. Now, this is from someone who never used to believe in anything spiritual, right? And yet I've had to accept that this is what happens because there's too many cases from all over the world of people saying this. If it was something that was limited to one culture or, you know, or it was different across the different cultures, then I would say, okay, this is something that's some weird anomaly to that culture. But when you look at reincarnation practices or beliefs right around the world, they're remarkably similar given we have very different lifestyles. So, you know, I think that's a good indicator to me that it really, really does happen this way. And again, I've lost my train of thought. I forgot where I was going with it. But yeah, I think
that's fine.
Yeah. But I do think that, you know, when you look at that, then you have to look at it and go, well, this is sort of how it works. So.
Yeah, and the thing is there is evidence to support it. Like you did this case called of Lugadi Devi, or however you say it. It's a weird. That's not like a sound I'm used to making. So Lugadi Devi.
No, it's actually spelled like Lugdi. But when because I try and be very respectful of people's cultures, and I like to pronounce the words as correctly as I can. So when I actually looked it up, it is actually said Lugadi Devi. So I had to do the same. And I tell you what, I did a lot of records over that one because I kept on stuffing it up. But yeah. But that case is absolutely a phenomenal case, and it's probably one of the most early proven cases. It's amazing.
Bizarre. It's just bizarre. So anybody who's listening, go check that episode out. I don't know. Yeah, let's go check it out. I don't know. Do you know what episode it is, Marilyn, that you did it on?
I can find out for you. One sec. But it is an amazing episode because it is probably one of the first. For those of you who don't know it, just as a quick overview, it is a little girl who was born in one city who remembered living the life of a young married woman in another city. When she was a child, she related a lot of facts about it. And before she even knew who the person was, she knew in herself who she was. She could picture the person who she was. She didn't really know a name, I don't think. But when the information came up, she kept wanting to go back to, I think it was Agra. She kept wanting to go back to Agra to try and find her family. In the end, it ended up being that she provided a lot of information. Word got out, and I think it was Mahatma Gandhi wanted to check and see if these details could be corroborated. So he put together like a committee of learned men of the time, and they all went back to Agra, and she was able to prove point after point after point after point. She could lead them right to the house. She showed them in a room that she had where she'd spoken about having left money, and she could show them where the hole was. The husband had actually since found it and basically spent it, but it was still had been there. She was able to identify her parents' house. She walked in, she was able to talk to her parents and tell them. It was just incredible. And all of this was proven because right in front of all these learned people. So it's an amazing case, and you should, have a listen to it or check it out on the net if you're not really sort of keen to, because it was a long episode. I think I ended up doing a double episode on that one. But I'll just find it for you. Hang on a tick. Shanti Devi and Lugati Devi were my episodes 18 and 19. So, but they really are worth a good listen because I was lucky and I found a book that had actually been written in sort of partnership with Shanti Devi, which, and this brings me back to why I want to conserve these cases, because Lugati Devi and Shanti Devi is a case that you'll often find on the net, but it doesn't discuss it all and it doesn't go into a lot of detail, and then you get a lot of people putting their own spin on things and it sort of veers away from the truth. So what I try to do when I find the episodes is get the purest source I can, and I then just kind of, drill down on that and try and cut out all of the other dross that sort of ends up floating in on them.
Right.
So
yeah, and it's so like I said, give that a listen if you guys are interested. It's Reincarnation Past Lives Revisited, episode 18 and episode 19. Really, really compelling evidence of reincarnation. It's actually pretty much a first-hand account as well from Shanti Devi. So check that out. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, Marilyn, is we were kind of talking about regression, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier in the episode, but I would like to get because you bring up some really good points. And as I don't even call it, like I told you earlier, I don't call it regression anymore. I call it spiritual hypnosis, just because of of how weird it gets sometimes. But I would like to hear your take on regression, because I think it's really important to have. It's almost like a reality check, if you will, your perspective.
I actually like that you say that it's a reality check, because I think that is something that, with regard to regression, is crucially important. You'll see a lot of people will come on the forum and they'll come in and say, oh, I had a regression done and this is that they found this and this and this and this and this and this, and they won't check any of those facts and they take them as being gospel. The problem that we have with regression, with regard to memory recall, is that the mind, if you ask for a start, if you ask someone a direct question, and I say, where did you live? What did your house look like when you lived? Then your mind might not have that information, but because it wants to provide the story and it wants to, we want to be helpful, it will say, oh, it was a red house, when actually it wasn't a red house at all. You might have lived somewhere completely different. So what happens is your mind can do a thing called cryptomnesia, which is where it takes facts that it's buried, that you've learnt, say, growing up, and that you've forgotten about, and it will then overlay them over the regression memories. And the problem with that is that you'll end up getting, say, maybe it could be anything from 20% to 80% that are true regression memories, but then you'll have this other percentage of it that aren't true. And if you have that happen, the problem that happens with that is that then people who don't believe in reincarnation and who don't believe in regression therapy will turn around and go, well, that's a lie because I can prove you wrong in this and I can prove you wrong in that. Another good case to listen to, and one that I actually believed was false for up until 2 years ago, was the Bridie Murphy case. You've probably heard of it. Bridie Murphy was the Virginia Tighe and Maury Bernstein, who were basically people in the 50s who lived in Pueblo in California. Maury was interested in reincarnation. He started regressing Virginia to try and see if she could remember anything from a past life before this life. And it was the first time really it was tried in the West. The problem was most of Virginia's memories, frighteningly, most of Virginia's memories were spot on, and she had really amazing local knowledge. So she would recall things, but instead of, if you were, say, someone who, she recalled a life in Ireland. She recalled being a woman that she called Bridie Murphy, who was married to Brian. They lived in County Cork, and then they finally moved up to Belfast. And she relates basically her life, and it's not an exciting life. It's just basically the life of a housewife. But because it was the first case that was really covered in the West, Maury started to seep out as he was doing this. He didn't have time to do a lot of research on it. And so the skeptics all jumped on it. When he released the book, some facts were proven, but most of them weren't really touched on. When he released the book, the skeptics went crazy and they said, this is all crap because that's not true and that's not true and that's not true. They picked about 4 or 5 points and they claimed that Bridie got her memories from a woman who lived over the road called Mrs. Corkle, who'd grown up in, which one was it? It wasn't Cork. It was one of the other provinces. It was nothing to do with Cork or Belfast. And they claimed that Virginia Tighe got all of these memories from her. And that's how it kind of stood. It was debunked again by people who did believe the case, but unfortunately the case was then permanently tainted because most people thought it was false, that it was just Virginia's imagination. One of the people that I'd interviewed before on my podcast said to me, you should look into the Bridie Murphy case. And I went, oh, yeah, okay. Wasn't madly keen. And I went, all right, fair enough. I'll do this for the sake of accuracy. So, and to actually go conclusively, yes, I believe this is the case, or conclusively, no, I don't. Well, when I started researching it, I went down the rabbit hole, and I swear I researched it for a solid 3 months or more. I got sick to death of looking at Ireland, and if I ever see it again, I'll be happy not to. But it was amazing the things that I found. Now, Virginia remembered that Bridie grew up in County Cork. She had a lot of information that related only to County Cork. And then she said they moved to Belfast. She had a lot of information that related only to Belfast. She had information about Antrim, which is near Belfast, and they went on a holiday there. But she didn't have really much knowledge about the rest of Ireland. She knew bits and pieces, which I found quite intriguing because if you're someone who's sort of fascinated by Ireland, you might have a general broad knowledge of Ireland, you know. But if you're someone who is relating your memories, you generally only have like information about your own life. I can talk about Melbourne and Ballarat because I've lived there a lot. I'd be less willing or good at talking about Sydney because I've been there once, you know. So what happened with her, I started researching it, and two things completely blew me away. One of the things that the skeptics said was that Bridie said that Sean was in the church. He was a Catholic, which at the time was kind of not a good thing. And she said that in the church he was called Sian. Sian? Yeah, Sian. she said he was called Sian. Well, the skeptics jumped on that and said, well, how come she's not saying Sean? She even spelled it out. It was Sean. Why is she doesn't know how to say Sean? That's ridiculous. She then said, I played the lyre, but instead of calling it the lyre, she called it the lear, right? And things like that, people went, no, see, it's a load of rubbish. She said that he went to St. Teresa's church, and St. Teresa's church, there was no St. Teresa's church at the time. It couldn't possibly have been, So there are all these things that the skeptics jumped on and went, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. So when we come back to, with regards to the bit about Siam, I found out in literally the last 5 minutes of doing the research, I was sitting there listening to a site that was pronouncing names in Irish Gaelic, because when Virginia was remembering her memories in the 50s, Irish Gaelic was pretty much a dead language. It was almost, people were saying it's going to be gone within 20 years. No one speaks it. No one's going to be speaking it, right? So they were saying it's a dead language. So there's no way that Virginia could have known it. I was sitting there listening to a site that was talking about, Irish names in Irish Gaelic, and I was listening for another name for another person that would have been in the podcast. And as I'm sitting there, the woman said, Brian in Irish Gaelic is Brian. And I went, what? Because I remembered Sian Brian. He was being called Brian in Irish Gaelic, which there is no possible way Virginia Tighe could have known, because it was a dead language at the time she was around.
Right.
And then when I looked up lyre, it was the same. And it was that, lyre in County Cork. There's 3 ways you can say lyre in Ireland. In one part of it, they call it a lear. In another part of it, they call it a lyre. And in the other part, they call it a la. And she calls it a lear, which is the exact pronunciation for County Cork, which is where she grew up. So for those sides of it, she was amazingly accurate. However, there were also parts where cryptomnesia came into play, and that was the problem. And this is the problem with hypnotic regression, because she remembered that he went to St. Teresa's church. Well, there was no St. Teresa church. But when Maury asked the question, he said to her, which church did he go to? So her mind at the time didn't have an answer. So it plucked St. Teresa's, because in Pueblo, or this is what I think happened, in Pueblo at the time, there were 2 St. Teresa's. And so her mind, wanting to supply an answer, said St. Teresa's. There was another part where she spoke of playing a board game or a game with her brother that sounds remarkably like a game that's from Northern America called Pegs and Squares or something. I can't remember. I mentioned it in the podcast, and it's got the same rules. So I'm assuming that was also another example of cryptomnesia. So if you're talking about regression to pull up memories, it's extremely important that every single fact, you need to write down every single fact that you remember, and you then need to research it. Did that really happen? Is that really how it was? Can I find a person? If you can find a person that your life relates to, then you can pretty much consider that to be a verifiable case. But the other thing is you can't go by general appearance. You can't go, well, I looked a lot like Abraham Lincoln, so I must have been Abraham Lincoln, because that's not really proof. When you think about in real life today, you have doppelgangers, people who look exactly identical have no connection to each other. You need to get those facts, and you need to drill down on those facts and check them to make sure that what you're remembering really genuinely is relevant and also happened in the place that you remember being. So,
yeah, and that brings up the question that I brought up before in past life, like talking to other past life regression practitioners, is asking leading questions. If you're going to do this for the sake of proving it, and actually probably in general, I would say it's not very good to ask leading questions, like especially the one like, which church did you go to? It'd be much more appropriate to ask, are you in a church?
Yes,
or
exactly.
Did he go to a church? Like for example, I did a regression for someone where they remembered being a crocodile, and I said, "Where are you?" And they're like, "I'm in a swamp." And I was like, "Okay, so are you like on Earth or are you somewhere else?" And that gives them like it's an open question is really what it is, because it's like if you're on Earth, like, yeah, okay, I'm in Florida, right, or I'm in Africa or whatever where we know crocodiles are. And she's like, "No, this doesn't look anything like Earth. There's like weird stuff around." Okay, that lets me narrow it down. Back to what I was saying, asking leading questions, not good, right?
Exactly.
And another thing, like one other thing that you brought up in that is she was talking about this, like, it's like a butter, like a compound butter that they would like, it's like peat butter or bog butter or
Yeah,
something like that.
Firkin butter. That was the other one that blew me
Yeah.
away. Basically, Firkin butter. Bridie asked Maury just off the bat, "Have you ever tried Firkin butter?" And so I did a bit of a look around, and I went, "Hell, there is such a thing," because it's basically a butter that they take. It's quite fascinating when you hear this. And it was around in the time of Bridie Murphy, but not any other time. But it's basically a butter that they mix with, I think it might have been with garlic, or it might have been just the butter itself. But they press it into like a wooden bucket with a lid, and then they'll bury it in the peat bog. And that actually has some kind of chemical reaction on the butter, turns it into something that doesn't look, according to what I've seen, doesn't look anything like butter, but and has a completely different consistency. But it was kind of a delicacy at the time. And I'm like, well, how did Virginia Ty, a woman who lives in Pueblo, California, know that? Because I hadn't heard of it either. And I'm actually more from an English background than she is. So you'd think if anyone heard of it, it would be someone from, I'd never heard of it. It's like, how the hell?
Yeah, and it had been like nobody had been making it around that time either. Like it was like extinct, basically, almost like the Gaelic language.
Exactly. Firkin butter ended up being ceased being made not long after Bridie Murphy sort of claims that she died. So it was around that time, but it was definitely there in her lifetime. So she sort of would have experienced it. I think she said something about her grandfather used to make it. And the only reason that we know about it is because there have been quite a few archaeological digs where this Firkin butter has been unearthed from the peat bogs. And there's quite a few examples of it in museums in probably the UK and Ireland, I'd imagine. But yeah, so how does that happen?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love when people pull that stuff up, like come out of these regressions with these verifiable facts. However, Marylin, I will tell you up front that I used to kind of be in the same position, and a lot of people are that are wanting to do this work and that are doing this kind of thing, like actually regressing people, they are not concerned with proving it. And I have kind of moved away from that as well, because it almost like, let me give you an example. I feel it kind of detracts from the therapeutic side of things if we're trying to prove it all the time, because I kept on trying, like in my early days when I was trying to prove it, kind of like what you're talking about, like I was trying to get those verifiable facts. I regressed my brother, and he stepped into this personality called Breck Stevens. And he's like, "My name's Breck Stevens. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky." And we got like a street name and I can't, like all this stuff, and he was able to name like his wife and how many brothers and sisters he had, and I was trying to nail down like a house number on the street, and I was like, do you have the house number? Do you have the house number? Like over and over, like throughout the regression, and he just stops me. He's like, "Why is that important?" And I had no answer. I was like, "I don't know. Like that's a good question. Why is it important?" And so I've kind of found like doing this work and trying to help people feel better, because that's really what it's about for me and a lot of us practitioners, is like helping people to feel better, is like digging for that proof is almost detracts from like the therapeutic part of it, if that makes sense. So I've kind of moved away from trying to prove it.
Well, it's actually interesting that you say that for two reasons. And in the forum, we will frequently say a lot. You'll get people come in and go, oh, I want to do a past life memory and I want to try and see if I can recall my past lives. And we always recommend to them, really it's better if you don't, because a lot of the memories come with a lot of trauma and a lot of pain. They can be very unsettling. I mean, it's not easy to watch yourself being burnt at the stake or beheaded or stabbed by someone, It can be quite traumatic. And when you look at a lot of the cases, a lot of them, the ones that have strong past life memories, often remember a very traumatic and violent death or,
Yep.
So
Yep.
we actually recommend that, if you don't have the memories, really seek them at your own risk, because you could end up regretting it. And we make that point very strongly because I think that's the point. I think what you're saying is exactly right. Where regression really comes into its own and where it excels is it is amazing for helping people with things like traumas and phobias from past life. And in that sense, hypnotic regression is brilliant.
Yeah, traumas and phobias, and also like other things too. So like behavior too. If you just don't know where a behavior comes from and you want to check it out, a lot of the times I found that, like I always say, regardless of whether or not it's real, it's a real experience. I'm gonna have to put that on a t-shirt because it's true. Even if your mind is making up a completely different random scenario just to justify this behavior, it gives you something to look into, and it gives you a place like an origin, because as humans we need an origin for stuff. Like we just don't really exist well in thinking of things just showing up out of nowhere. So for like behaviors and things too, if you're just curious about it, if you want to connect with yourself, and even if you want to do just like a hypnotic journey, this stuff can actually be really helpful and really relaxing too. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And I think it's very wise of you to mention about things like behaviors, like when we get into these patterns of destructive behavior, where we pick people who might be violent, or we pick people who are closed off. And so we constantly end up in these relationships that fail, things like that. I think often that can be related to experiences from the past. And I can relate to that from my own life, from my past in this life. I can actually see, and I worked out as I was going along, some of the patterns that I was doing, and it was because of the past, and I'm like, I worked that out myself, but a lot of people struggle to be that introspective, or it's hard to sometimes find out the path of how do I start to find that out. And I think that's where regression can be amazing, because it allows you to do it in a safe and supported environment in a way.
Yeah, the other angle to it too is that it's hard to be hard on yourself. Okay. People don't like doing it. People
Yes.
don't like to admit that they're wrong. Like the ego is huge. And what regression is really good at is it's really, really good at allowing you to step outside of yourself and say, okay, for example, if we were doing a regression on you, let's just say we go through a past life and you lived a past life as a very wealthy woman who spent all of her money on herself, and you, not that I'm saying you are, but you feel that you're selfish in this life, right? So, okay, you ask this wealthy woman who lived this past life is very wealthy, what can Marylin do in order to not feel so selfish, right? And then at that point, you can almost like lay into yourself without any guilt or feeling any guilt, because at that point, you're not Marylin. You're this wealthy woman who lived 200 years ago.
Oh, that's a good point. I've never really done a regression for any kind of phobias or anything like that, so I didn't really know how you did it. So that's actually a really, really good point, because I think the thing that's hardest, I mean, as I said, I kind of mentioned my life was a little difficult at the start. And I was lucky enough, because of the experiences I had and the people that I had around me, they made me start to ask why. Why do I do this? Why does my mother do this? Why did this happen? And it's asking why that I think is one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. But most people don't ask themselves why. They just keep saying, why does this happen to me? Which is a different thing. Why does this happen to me? Why I must have killed a busload of nuns, Why does this happen to me? Instead of looking at what is the actual pathway back to what happened to me to make me feel this way or to make me do this. If you can ask yourself that, it's a huge thing. And I think that's where regression can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Just stepping outside yourself. And it's really interesting when it happens to you, you're just like, you come out of it and you're like, wow, I didn't know that I felt that way about myself. So it's really interesting. And if anybody wants to try it, for my audience listening, I have interviewed a ton of practitioners, and I've got even more interviews backed up in the queue I'm going to release for practitioners. So feel free to listen to them. And if you feel drawn to any of them, reach out to them. They're really great. And this kind of also leads me to Marylin. You have a wonderful podcast. I love the work that you're doing. If you don't mind just plugging it and talking about your actual podcast, where people can find you, if you have a website or a blog, what do you got going on?
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really, really appreciate it, because it's something that I really value. I mean, I started it out not doing that. I started out thinking of it as being something that might be fun to do. But as I've gone along, I've come to realize that it is something that is important to me. So it's Reincarnation Past Lives Revisited is the podcast. I cover the cases more of the children and some regression cases, but as I say, the ones that are really solidly proven. I don't cover cases that can't be proven, because for me, it's about providing people with that the trust to believe in reincarnation in a way. There's a lot of people out there who dive bomb it and who don't believe it and who think it's just people deluding themselves. And I think it's really important to be able to add another dialogue to that and say, well, you tell me what's happening then, because this is what I'm seeing, So I have got a website which is completely terrible, so please don't go there. I've got to fix that up. I've got to do something with it. But you'll mainly find me on Facebook. I'm in Signs of Reincarnation with Jim Matlock. If anyone wants to sort of look at the more kind of logical approach to it, or the scientific approach to it, that's what's certainly covered in Signs of Reincarnation. But I will warn you that we kind of don't go into the spiritual aspect of it at all, because what we're trying to do is get a voice out there for the scientific study of it. So it's, you won't hear about spirit mediums or the Akashic record or anything like that. That's not saying we don't believe in them. It's just saying that at the moment they can't be demonstrated in the research. So we stay away from that. But I also have my own Facebook page there for the for Reincarnation Past Lives Revisited, and I'll put on there the episodes as well, and a bit of a blurb about it. So if anyone wants to put a comment about it or ask me a question about any of the episodes, you can find me there. And hopefully you'll have a listen and enjoy it.
Perfect. And as always, links to all that stuff is going to be in the description of this episode. So go head over to Marylin's podcast and her Facebook page. Check her out. Give her some support. It's really important work that she's doing. And Marylin, I hate to put you on the spot, but do you happen to have some kind of a message for my listeners?
I think the message that I'd take from all of this is, well, for a start, seize your dream. If you want to do something, go out and give it a try, because starting the podcast is probably one of the best things I've ever done. And it's been such a wonderful journey for me. But the other thing I would say is stop worrying so much about life, and basically don't worry about death. Don't worry about, life or how it's going, because, I think this is all planned and there's a reason for it all. And I think it's really important to recognize that life is actually a precious gift. And even if it's not in a great place for you at the moment, that can change, and it will change, because life never stays the same. So hang in there and try not to worry too much.
That's a beautiful answer, Marylin. Well, thank you so much for coming onto my podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing. I've loved it.
That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Marylin for coming onto the show, and I would also like to thank you for tuning in. head on over to my Facebook or my Twitter for some bonus content that I'm going to force myself to start posting at least every other day if I can, and also show updates. So like when this episode was late, that's kind of where I talked about the show being late, so you can get show updates there. Also, I would really appreciate you guys leaving me a review and a good rating on Apple Podcasts. If you listen on Apple or Spotify or anything like that, it would really help me get the show out to more people and really help me to accomplish my goal of providing a platform for people to talk about this stuff. If you want to come on the show to talk about your past life experience or your knowledge on any metaphysical topic, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com, and I would love to have you on the show. What superpower would you choose if you could choose one?
That's a good question. It wouldn't be a strength thing. It would be a healing thing. I'd like to be able to heal people, or I'd like to be able to talk to animals. I've got to say, either of those two.
Oh, yeah. What animal would you want to talk to?
Well, I just find animals are such beautiful little souls, and I really honestly believe that animals, particularly dogs and cats, because we're so connected with them, are actually sent from the universe, or whatever you want to call it, for when we're going through difficult periods in our lives. Because I actually found that with my dog. I was always a cat person. I'd never had a dog of my own. Then I got with a partner who wanted a dog, and so we bought a dog, and then of course we broke up, and he was like, yeah, I don't want the dog. So I took her, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was an extreme. I've just been through a pretty, what I would say, extremely difficult 10 years of my life, just difficult things to deal with. And if I hadn't had Cassie, I honestly don't know how I would have got through. And I think that's how I came to the idea that I think she was sent to me. But it's also because she was a pound dog, and so she had a lot of trauma in the start of her life. So she's neurotic as anything. She's as neurotic as hell. And she's got like multiple issues. She's really high maintenance, but I just adore her. And I'd love to be able to talk to Cassie and say, chill out. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not sending you back to the pound. We're together forever, So things like that.
I have a cat named Aspen, and if I talk to him, I'm pretty sure he would just look at me and tell me to f*** off. Now that all that's done, here is my